Ever since the day they first stepped onto the football field wielding instruments they barely knew how to hold, the Clarksville Misfit Marching Band had been doomed to off-key fame. Nobody could forget them once they started playing because, try as they might, they never seemed to hit a single correct note. And yet, their enthusiasm was so infectious that even the audience rooted for them despite their musical dissonance. The band's members came from every corner of the small town. Some had been scouted by an overly optimistic music teacher. Others were forced to join by well-meaning parents eager to see them involved in any sort of extracurricular activity. There was a rumor that one or two of them simply wandered onto the field by accident and never left. Regardless of how they arrived, these unlikely musicians forged a spirit stronger than their questionable sense of pitch. The band's leader, and the person primarily responsible for all the chaos, was a red-haired, bespectacled senior named Harriet Hattie Green. She believed that music wasn't just about being technically perfect, it was about having the guts to keep going even when you sounded like a startled goose. Hattie's unflinching optimism was legendary. She was infamous for patching up mistakes with a grin and a double thumbs up, a gesture that came to symbolize the band's entire mission. No matter how many sour notes, just keep marching with your head held high. Stories circulated of her diving into each fiasco with unwavering cheer. One time, her clarinet's reed snapped mid-performance, and rather than stand there in shock, she'd improvised a bird call routine that perfectly blended with her squeaks. The stands erupted in laughter, and the routine became a local legend. That was Hattie in a nutshell. To their credit, the administration tried to help these poor souls improve. The principal brought in specialized tutors who spent hours painstakingly teaching them correct finger positions and breathing techniques. Yet every time a note was demonstrated, half the band would produce something drastically different because they were so caught up in the joy of simply creating sound. There were comedic moments too absurd to forget. The time Manny, the trumpeter, tried too hard to hit a high note and ended up falling backward on the drum major's podium. Or the day Tilly, the tuba player, absentmindedly walked away during practice while still wearing her instrument, unintentionally carrying half the formation row with her. In any conventional sense, they were a disaster. But they were a disaster with spirit. As the big 4th of July parade approached, every musical outfit in the region prepared to showcase their best. Community pride was at an all-time high. Posters went up around town advertising the soon-to-be biggest and grandest display of marching bands ever seen. The Clarksville Misfit Marching Band was scheduled, ironically, at the front of the entire procession. It wasn't out of admiration for their skills. No, the other groups requested them up front because it was rumored their cacophony gave everyone else time to prepare for a grand entrance. Whether that was true or not, Hattie wore the news like a badge of honor. She insisted that leading the parade was a testament to their unstoppable enthusiasm, which was in some way probably correct. A typical rehearsal started with Hattie calling them into formation. Or rather, it started with her valiantly attempting to call them into formation while no one knew exactly where they were supposed to stand. Manny always ended up too close to the drumline, convinced that he could dodge the flying drumsticks. Tilly's monstrous tuba had a habit of banging into the clarinet players, prompting squeaks of protest. Freed from desks and textbooks, the students roamed like cheerful puppies, each with an out-of-tune risk waiting to happen. Still, Hattie persevered, reading out instructions from her battered, coffee-stained band binder. She enforced a bare minimum level of discipline: no hugging your instrument during a march, no spontaneously dancing in the middle of a piece, unless it magically improved the music, and, most importantly, if anyone crashed into anyone else, they had to do a gentle bow and say, "My apologies, esteemed colleague." It hardly seemed possible that they'd get any better before the parade. The caretaker of the school football field often joked he'd need to patch the grass daily due to their unexpected pratfalls. But improvements did occur in small, random spurts. Gabrielle, the timid piccolo player, finally gained enough confidence to play more than 2 notes in a row without freezing. Marcus, the maniac on drums, learned to keep a beat, albeit a beat that was still about a second behind. And Manny, dear Manny, discovered that if he angled his trumpet just right, he could occasionally produce a note that was at least in the same time zone as the correct pitch. These baby steps might have seemed trivial to outsiders, but to the misfit marching band, each one was cause for celebration. After all, their motto, painted on a battered sign outside the band room, was "No step too small, no note too wrong." A week before the parade, Ms. Albright, the school's dedicated and slightly frazzled band director, grew increasingly desperate for some decent coherence in their performance. She ended up recruiting a few academically gifted honor students who excelled in classical training, hoping their guidance could help the rest of the group. That effort backfired spectacularly the first afternoon. The advanced flutist tried to politely correct Tilly on her tuba posture, only to get pinned against the bleachers by an overeager movement. The clarinet section bombarded their visiting mentors with so many squeals that it sounded like a goose farm gone rogue. Finally, the exasperated honor students admitted defeat. They did, however, leave behind helpful tips that some in the band attempted to incorporate. The end result was a weird blend of advanced techniques performed too enthusiastically, leading to an even stranger medley of squeaks and clangs. Somehow, Ms. Albright realized their chaotic outcome still brought them joy. When parade day rolled around, Clarksville was abuzz. Flags were hoisted on every lamppost and the sidewalks were packed with residents jockeying for prime viewing positions. Kids brandished sparklers, parents covered their ears preemptively, and local shop owners arranged chairs in neat rows along the route. Other marching bands arrived in crisp uniforms, polished instruments glinting under the bright morning sun. From the respectable Midvale Marchers to the famously precise Glendale High School Band, each group seemed to exude that effortless harmony that comes from many hours of dedicated practice. Then, at the head of it all, stood the Clarksville Misfit Marching Band. Lopsided hats, wrinkled uniforms, and mismatched socks. Yet no one could deny they owned the biggest grins. Right before the parade kicked off, Miss Albright decided to give one final pep talk, more out of a sense of duty than any realistic hope. "Band, let's remember our fundamentals," she began, voice quivering just slightly. Hattie nodded vigorously, her clarinet wiggling in agreement. Manny tried to quiet himself at attention, though he dropped his mouthpiece on the pavement. A few members giggled and fumbled around, but Miss Albright pressed on. "Stay focused on your breath, try to follow Hattie's lead, and above, all have fun." With a huge exhale, she stepped back to let them take their place at the front of the procession. It was time. At precisely 10 o'clock, a grand marshal blew a whistle and waved a bright pennant. The parade started down Main Street. The Misfit Marching Band launched into motion, and the first few sounds left the crowd blinking in bewilderment. Most watchers had prepared themselves, but each year they forgot just how truly majestic the dissonance could be in person. Manny's trumpet blasted a half step off whatever note he intended. Tilly's tuba let out a comical wah that echoed through the corridor of red, white, and blue decorations. The clarinet squawked in near unison, while the drum line sawed through the rhythms like an unbalanced washing machine. It was, objectively, a musical train wreck. But the band's footwork? That was a different story. In a surprising twist, everyone managed to stay mostly in step in the crowd. A young toddler, held by his astonished grandmother, broke into a delighted laugh at the unusual sound. Nearby, an elderly veteran cracked a wry grin, tipping his cap in salute. A group of middle school band kids, aspiring musicians who had come to watch the older students, initially burst into giggles, but as the band continued to march with dogged determination, their laughter morphed into appreciation. There was something endearing in watching these misfits hustle so passionately, forging a path with music that, though off-key, was undeniably lively. The enthusiasm radiated from Hattie, whose high knees and clarinet flourish set the tone for the entire group. You could sense their sense of camaraderie. Clarinets shared sly smiles when they hit a note that almost worked. The trumpets offered Manny supportive hollers each time he attempted a particularly high note. And Tilly kept a comedic swagger in her step that could have stolen any show. Progressing down Main Street, they passed the first set of judges' local music teachers from neighboring towns and tried to perform a well-rehearsed medley. Or perhaps well-rehearsed was an overstatement. It was a piece that combined patriotic favorites, culminating in a triumphant finale that never quite merged. Hattie counted them in with a brisk wave of her clarinet, and they began. Manny's part was supposed to be the banner line of, "You're a grand old flag," but instead, Manny soared into the stratosphere of unknown tones. Meanwhile, Tilly came in a measure too early, delivering a comical bass line that should have waited for the star-spangled chorus. Even Ms. Albright, trailing behind them, was forced to stifle a spasm of laughter. But the lively energy kept flowing, the crowd clapped, and the judges nodded politely, though none seemed prepared to jot down particularly high marks. Midway through the route, the band encountered a small hazard. A dog, excited by the heartbeat-like drum cadence, darted into their formation. Gabrielle, piccolo in hand, shrieked, nearly colliding with the dog as it wagged its tail in musical delight. Unruffled, Hattie nearly missed a step but recovered seamlessly, pivoting her clarinet to keep from tripping. The rest of the band parted like the Red Sea, forming a new formation around the furry intruder while never stopping their attempts to play. Despite squeals, shrieks, and off-tempo drum rolls, they weathered the distraction with the same unwavering excitement that defined them. A few spectators oohed and applauded their quick thinking, while the dog wove happily out of the parade, presumably seeking more action elsewhere. Late in the parade route, the band had one final big number planned. Miss Albright had nearly lost her voice trying to get them to nail a recognizable rendition of Stars and Stripes Forever. Recognizable was the key word. She hoped if they kept the right tempo and at least landed about half the melody, folks might know what it was supposed to be. And for a fleeting, glorious moment, something magical happened. As they began the piece, the drumline eased into the correct beat. Manny managed a respectable approximation of the main line, and Tilly's tuba provided that buoyant oom-pah that nearly aligned with Manny's tune. The clarinet, squeaky but earnest, chirped in at the designated point. Gabrielle hit a few high notes that soared over the cacophony. For a full half of the number, they were somehow counterplaying Stars and Stripes Forever. But as if the universe decided that was quite enough coherence for them, Hattie's clarinet reed suddenly gave out, squawking like a startled parrot. Manny, taken by surprise, cracked on the next high note, letting out a flurry of squeaks. Tilly, thrown off and trying to follow Manny's lead, delivered a tuba grunt so low it felt like an earthquake rumbling through the streets. The clarinets descended into mismatched squeals, and the drumline sped up, possibly hoping to make a dash for the finish line. The moment of near harmony transitioned into the band's usual comedic mesh, blending surprising confidence with absolute musical bedlam. At the final turn onto Oak Street, the band ended their piece. Or more accurately, Miss Albright scrambled behind them, waving her arms to cut the flailing rhythm short. The entire group arrived at the meltdown conclusion with a flourish that was, in its strange way, mesmerizing. Panting and exhausted, they paused in front of the grandstand, where the mayor and other dignitaries stood, offering polite applause. Hattie took off her hat and bowed, clarinet under her arm, beaming as if they had just delivered the performance of a lifetime. The rest of the band followed suit, bowing in a ragtag wave, each breathless and bright-eyed. Once the official parade finished, the community gathered in the park for food stalls, games, and the awarding of trophies to the best marching bands. The midday sun glinted off polished trophies displayed on the stage. As expected, Glendale High School took top honors for most technically proficient performance, and Midvale Marchers won Best Uniform Precision. One by one, ribbons, plaques, and modest awards were handed out to the more polished groups, each bowing with professional composure. Meanwhile, the Clarksville Misfit Marching Band sat on the grass, sipping lemonade, giddy as ever. They knew they weren't going to collect any conventional awards. Then came a special announcement. We have one more presentation, the Spirit of Music Award. Today, we'd like to recognize a band that, while finding their own path musically, truly embodies resilience, positivity, and community unity. A hush fell over the park. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Miss Albright looked up, curious. The Spirit of Music Award goes to our very own Clarksville Misfit Marching Band. The cheer from the audience was so loud it nearly rattled the lemonade cups. Hattie, eyes wide, nearly dropped her clarinet. Manny hooped, Tilly nearly toppled backward with tuba in tow, and the clarinets squealed in delight. Unanimously, they sprang up and swarmed the stage to accept the novelty trophy, a golden statuette shaped like a musical note that seemed to be gently buzzing, as if it too were off key. The host gave a brief speech about the joys of community and how real music is about more than perfect pitch. It was about camaraderie, celebration, and the willingness to share your love of sound with others, even if it wasn't always pretty. The band stood there, sweaty uniforms and unkempt hair, tears of laughter and gratitude in their eyes. Hattie managed to find her voice for an acceptance speech. "We might have a lot to learn about notes and rhythms," she declared, "but we don't need any lessons on enthusiasm. Thank you for celebrating with us, even when we're off by a mile." Laughter and applause echoed across the park. Many in the crowd dabbed at tears, touched by the sincerity. Indeed, how often do you see a band so notorious for messing up being honored as if they were hometown heroes? With the ceremony over, the members hopped off stage, trophy in hand. Ms. Albright, who hadn't quite recovered from the surprise, wrapped Hattie in a joyous hug. Manny gave Tilly a high five so forceful it sounded like a mini cymbal crash. Several other band directors from neighboring towns approached to congratulate them, some openly chuckling about the band's legendary goofs while praising their liveliness. It wasn't lost on anyone that the Clarksville Misfits were, ironically, the most talked about group of the event. People might not remember every perfect sequence from the other bands, but they'd remember the unstoppable spirit of the band leading the parade, squeaking and rumbling triumphantly all the way. As afternoon drifted into evening, the festivities continued. Free hot dogs and lemonade flowed, and a makeshift stage was set up for local talents to perform. Many of the other high school bands had already left or were packing up their immaculate instruments, but the Clarksville Misfit Marching Band lingered in the park, still buzzing from their big moment. A local DJ started to spin upbeat tunes and spontaneous dancing broke out. Without hesitation, Hattie convinced the band to join in. Soon Manny was blasting his trumpet in unison with a pop track, Tilly provided a comedic bass line that actually fit, and the clarinets hopped along with squeaks that somehow merged into the fun. By sunset, the band found themselves tired, sweaty, and unbelievably happy. They collapsed onto blankets under the glow of paper lanterns. The sense of accomplishment that warmed them was something deeper than any trophy. Yes, they still played all the wrong notes. Yes, they occasionally marched out of time. But they'd done it proudly, and the town had embraced them for it. Hattie pulled out the Spirit of Music trophy to a chorus of cheers. They posed for goofy photos, making silly faces and brandishing instruments as if they'd just conquered the world. It didn't matter that some of the other bands whispered or rolled their eyes at the concept of awarding them anything. Clarksville understood what music really meant. Nightfall ushered in fireworks, bursting into colorful blooms across the sky. The band huddled together, instruments laid to the side, heads tilting upward, oohing and awing at each pop of light. Hattie marveled at the brilliant yellows, shimmering blues, and resounding booms. Each echo made her think of their own chaotic notes reverberating across Main Street. She couldn't help but feel proud that, in their own quirky way, they'd brought joy to people's faces. The parade might be over, but their legacy would live on. As the last glittering shower of sparks fell from the sky, she turned to the others and grinned. "Next year," she said with an impish twinkle in her eye, "we'll be even louder." Giggles and playful groans met her declaration. Manny shook his head in pretend exasperation. Tilly let out a dramatic gasp, and Gabrielle squeaked out a celebratory high note on her piccolo. Ms. Albright, overhearing, gave a resigned but affectionate laugh. "If you keep practicing," she teased, "you might just pull off an actual, recognizable tune." They laughed together, unconcerned about the future's infinite potential for sour notes. In the realm of the Clarksville Misfit Marching Band, there was always room for improvement. Plenty of it, in fact. But there was also an untouchable wellspring of joy that no amount of discord could silence. As the last chord of the day echoed in their hearts, the band members packed up, carrying their instruments and the new trophy home. They departed with the knowledge that while they still had many rungs to climb on the musical ladder, they'd already reached the summit of shared delight. And that, more than anything else, was what made them the most enthusiastic marching band Clarksville and perhaps the world had ever seen.